thanks everybody for coming. The reason we decided to have this is that I have an 8th grader boy, and we just went through the process of kind of narrowing down the high school choice and going through the application process and selecting the school, and it was kind of like searching in the dark to do it. Essentially, the school doesn't provide any kind of roadmap for that, and so kind of had to rely on other parents and just sheer dumb luck to get through some of it. And Arj here, he has a daughter that also in the 8th grade that also went through it. So we put this together so there's perspective from both the boy side and the girl side and the mixed side to tell a little bit about our experiences and some things that we did right and some things that we didn't do so right, so you can benefit from our mistakes, and then also just to answer any questions that we could possibly answer based on our experience, and hope you learn something, and you can go forward with that information as we go forward.
You want to take that for?
Yeah, go ahead. We didn't really rehearse this, so.
So let me dovetail quickly into what Brian said about the Hudson School and how they help with applications or how they don't help with applications. If you take a school like Stevens, everything stops with the 8th grade, so they're very incentivized to push the kids into the best high schools, so that's their calling card. Hudson has a high school, so they don't take that much of an interest in pushing forward. But what I mean by pushing forward is there is a placement counselor at other schools who's going to go to each and every teacher and say, have you finished your recommendations? Why did you write such a recommendation? This is a great student, rewrite this, and things like that. That's not going to happen in Hudson. And so, the onus is on us, the parents, to take a more active part of this process. And it's a fine line, because you push the teachers too much, they're going to say, back off, I'm not going to send you the recommendation quick enough or whatever it is. And if you don't take enough of an effort, maybe it goes late, and that works against your student. So it's a kind of a fine line. Would you agree, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's a weird kind of a dynamic that we have, simply because while the school has acknowledged that the middle school and the upper school are very separate in their approaches and who they're trying to get and who ends up going there, and the middle school is much bigger. They kind of said, well, we're not going to give any help to the middle schoolers because we want them all to apply to the upper school, even though their approach is completely separate, and they acknowledge that most kids are going to go somewhere else, or at least apply somewhere else. So it kind of trickles down through all of the different phases of what we're going to talk about here tonight. And as we kind of go in order. So what we've kind of seen is that there's really 3 types of schools that you're going to run into out there. You're going to run into the public schools, which are high tech is one that is very sought after these days. It's a brand new facility in Secaucus, and it's not as easy to get into as it used to be, because maybe the facility is new and you're taking fewer kids from the Hoboken, Jersey City area now. The other really top public school that's out there is McNair, but that is a tested school, and you have to be a Jersey City resident to get into that one. And we didn't really touch on any of the New York City public schools because they have their whole separate process and their whole you have to be a resident there, and anything from performing arts schools like LaGuardia and Frank Sinatra to like top-notch Stuyvesant, which is one of the really hard to get into public schools there. But we didn't touch on any of that because you really have to be committed to New York City. You have to live there, and you have to take a whole set of exams and everything. So that would be the public school. As far as the private schools, that's going to, there's some on this list here. The private schools tend to be about double the parochial schools in terms of cost, maybe 2.5 times the price. Mixed bag, right? Of the private schools, some of them, we can kind of get into some of that.
I think they all pretty much range between 40 and 48, right?
Yeah, starting, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the parochial schools will tend to be more in the about half of that range, down to 20 range for each of those. And there's a list, there's a number of them on here, from ones in New Jersey to ones in New York City, pretty much. What this list is that you have on the sheet here is no means an exhaustive list, but it is a good starting point for what are some of the schools that the 8th grade has applied to or has viewed and gone to open houses and kind of scoped them out mainly. There are certainly some other schools there. And the big thing about trying to find a school that is right for you is there's a couple of factors that definitely go into that beyond the price. Certainly the commute is one thing that, when we were looking at schools, it had to be a school that our son Jackson could get to by himself. He's got to be able to get there every day, and whether that's a bus, a train, a light rail, a bike, whatever. And it turns out that Jackson's going to be going to Seton Hall Prep, which is maybe one of the further schools out. So he's going to take a shuttle from our building to the New Jersey Transit, and New Jersey Transit
To West Orange.
to West Orange, and then a school shuttle to the school.
Mm-hmm.
So all in, he's going to be at about 50 minutes each way, which sounds like a lot, but if you were looking at a school like Regis, which is on the Upper East Side, to get from here to there, 50 minutes.
Yeah.
One of the kids that no longer goes to Hudson, but was here last year, he goes to Horace Mann, which is up in the Bronx. So he has to go from Jersey City. He takes the PATH train into, I think it's 14th Street, and they have a bus that takes them up to the Bronx. It's gotta be an hour. There's no way that you could tell me that that's not an hour.
Yeah.
So while it sounds like 45 minutes to an hour might be a long time to go, when you start to kind of draw that circle and do the commute, it's just like our commute, but just, they're doing it instead. So you have to be comfortable with what your high schooler is going to be facing out there, whether it's they're a city kid and can manage the subways or the PATH. And, for instance, Xavier is right off of the 14th Street PATH. For somebody who's not even a city kid, that's kind of an easy non-city thing, right? You're off the PATH 1 block to school, you probably can get back on the PATH and never really have to deal with much of the city at all if you don't want to. Now, what's the likelihood that that's going to happen over the course of time? You'll never see them again. But for us, it was kind of drawing that circle, and all of these schools kind of fall within that circle of, I don't know, maybe an hour or less, depending.
Yeah, depending on police. Nightingale is an hour 15, whatever. If you're right on the subway, it's an hour. It's not. It's an hour 15, hour and a half, whatever.
And the good and the bad of it, say take the Upper East Side for instance, is that you find that there are a lot of schools up there. So all of a sudden there's this hidden society of hundreds and hundreds of high school students that all go to school within a few blocks of each other, because a lot of the schools are much smaller. So there's 100 kids here and 150 kids there, but when you add it all up, there's a lot of high schoolers that are going to school in those particular areas within the city. So that was, another concern that we had, or a way we kind of parsed the whole thing out was, if you want a school of a certain size, Hudson School is 60, 70 kids. some of these schools on there, like a region, the boys' schools, for instance, they were all about 1,000 kids. So
Per grade or
the whole school.
Oh.
So we were really shooting for something about that size. So you'd have a kind of a broad experience of clubs and activities and kids and whatever else that you want. Arj, how the schools that what?
Yeah, I mean, talking about the commute, I would say that's the last thing you need to worry about, because I think looking at kids, not just Anya, my kid, but people who are like 1 year, 2 year senior to her in Hudson, who went to Nightingale and I forget Trinity, they were initially scared about the 1 hour commute, an hour and a half commute compared to say McNair, which is like 15 minutes to 20 minutes. But then, the curriculum is very different, and they learn to get more organized, and some of these schools have more efficient ways to do your homework in between classes and stuff like that, more flexible schedules. So I would say that seems to be the least thing that you should worry about, the commute, because the kids are growing up, they're going to high school anyway, and they'll figure it out. And the other thing which is going to fit your student is the segregation, which we haven't done here, but into maybe liberal arts schools or something which is more specialized towards STEM, math, science, whatever, or something geared towards performing arts. So, for example, Packer Collegiate in Brooklyn is more of a liberal arts college. Nightingale is a generalist school. And so you have all these different schools which cater to different programs, and maybe your kid is into STEM. So then, it kind of naturally falls which school you kind of apply to and so on. Does that make sense?
Which one is Nightingale in here? On this list?
I don't know
Oh,
if I
okay.
put it on there, honestly. It was just listed.
Okay.
The other thing you'll notice about the commute that I didn't mention, but Arj made a good point, was take a school like Regis, for example. Kids come from all over. They come from Staten Island. They come from Poughkeepsie. They come from a long way away to get there. And, the school day might be 8 to 3 o'clock, but a lot of those kids are getting there at 7 and they're leaving about 6 p.m. to go home because they have extracurricular activities at the school. So, when you're looking at the commute, it's a good point that it's not just, hey, they're going to be there and then they're leaving there and just coming straight back. A lot of times they're going to have something to do after school, whether it's a sport or an activity or a study group or something. So their days are going to get probably as long as ours, if not longer, in terms of how much time they're out of the house. For some people that's good. For some people that's bad. Probably be better as the kids get older. And, so that's part of that whole, hey, when you're kind of factoring it in that they're going to become adults with their own full schedules that we're going to be a lot less controlling over or managing. And, so I think that takes a lot less of the commute worries into that, because they're going to have to own it. And maybe if they have a 40-minute bus or train ride, that's the one time that they can sit and get their homework done, or the one time they can sit and read a book or chill out or something, because they're going to be managed with their own schedule the rest of the time.
Seton Hall too, I think has 1 day a week that they allow the students to come in just a little bit later, because they recognize, I think, that they all have a lot of commutes and they're doing this all week long. So that was one thing that I kind of liked about Seton Hall Prep. I think it's like a Thursday of the week. They let them come in at like 8:30, 8:45 or something like that. So let them sleep in a little longer.
What time?
As opposed to, isn't it like around 8:15?
8:15.
Yeah, I think it's around
I think they have
8:15. So it's not that much later, but they try to give them a little bit of time on 1 day a week.
Yeah, the only area that honestly that I think I'm a little concerned about for my son being so far away, which may not be a concern at all, is more in that when he has stuff to do on the weekends there, or we have events to go there, it's kind of a pain to get there. It's in, you know,
Where is it in Old Park?
it's in West Orange on the other side of Newark.
Got it.
It's
So-
not that hard,
It's
but
the wrong time of day. It's
1 and
hard.
9 and all the
Right.
construction that's been going on, it's been a little.
So, I mean, and
Crazy.
I guess that's on me, not on the kids so much in terms of how that whole thing is going to shake out. Because, you know, I may never go there in 4 years. Who knows?
I'm sure you'll go there. We will be there.
But, you know, and I think that in some ways with the commute, I think it's harder than maybe finding a college for the kids because you are constrained by a certain commute or a certain distance. I mean, this list is by no means exhaustive, but it's starting to get to that point where there's not that many more schools that you were going to really add to that list of an hour and 15 minutes. Whereas, you know, when they go to college, it can be pretty much anywhere, and, you know, then it's open to a lot of different options that you don't have here.
This is all good preparation for college.
Yeah, so, you know,
Applications,
yeah, I agree.
I think.
So the
How much
next
they have to
piece
do.
of this would be, you know, open houses. Most of the schools will do open houses. They will start where I recommend that if you're going to see a lot of schools, how many schools did you say? 12. You better start in the 6th grade.
Too late now.
We're
We're gonna be busy fall.
Because,
Yeah.
you know, they don't give, usually a lot of the schools only have 1 or 2 days a year that they
Yeah.
do an open house. It's not like it's every weekend or you know, you have to really kind of fit in, right? Where you're gonna, so you have to really do your research and schedule up front, and, you know, you might only do it in the 6th grade, or you might, the real prepared people will do it in the 6th grade and then go back again in the 7th grade. I don't, you know, but we did not go to high tech, for instance, but the people who went there, a lot of them waited in line, you know, several
hours.
It was like
Oh,
worse
yeah.
than Disney
Yeah,
World.
It was a long line.
Yeah, most of the
Long
big
one.
one.
I was there.
Yeah.
You know, and
We-
so you're not getting to 2 that day if there are 2 that day.
I would say that's one thing that I felt like we learned from this process is we only went to 4 schools, and we pretty much said like these are the ones that we're going to take a look at. Maybe we should have looked at a few more, but ultimately we ended up happy with where we ended up. So that's good, and Jackson got a great scholarship out of it, and so it was great. But I do think that like maybe we should have, knowing how much pressure was on him, waiting for acceptances. You know, I felt like he would have preferred in that moment to have said, I applied to 6 or 7 schools.
Yeah.
So
Did he apply for 4?
he applied to 4. Oh, wait, no.
3.
1, 2. Oh, yeah, 3. 3 out of, we visited 4. He applied to 3 out of the 4.
We tried to get into the open house last year. By the time we got there, the road had been shut down by the police.
Oh yes, yes.
Hopefully it'll be
To
different.
where- to where?
Hi.
To high tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all of the schools, you know, they have lines and you have to go through, and I mean, and I guess it might sometimes make sense to go through twice, you know, 2 separate times, because the one school that we didn't apply to on there, I would say we had a subpar chaperone, and maybe it colored our thoughts of the school in a way that, you know, a lot of people really like that school and have great things to say, and some of Jackson's classmates are going there, and, you know, and it's good school, it's good, strong academic school, but we had a very kind of so-so experience with it.
yeah,
With the open
a very
house, you mean?
quiet
With the open house,
chaperone.
because the kids the
You didn't say
student
much.
chaperone we had was, you know, not as impressive as we were hoping.
Well, just in
Compared to
general, I
some of
felt
the
like
other
that open
schools?
house wasn't as impressive as the other ones that we visited in terms of how it was organized, and that kind of gave us a good feeling too about the school. So, and Jackson just simply wasn't interested in that school. So it
Yeah.
kind of came down to that too.
But
He
so,
just
so
didn't see how it
that's
fit
one
in.
way is the open house is to kind of get a feel. The other thing that, again, we missed out on was the HAP program, and I don't know if the girls' school has an equivalent of that, but certainly the parochial schools have this thing called HAP, St. Peter, Xavier. It's for kids in the 7th grade, the summer of the 7th, going into 8th grade, and I think it's a 3 to 4 week, almost free program to go to the school and then do a half a day, or half a day of learning and half a day of sports. So St. Peter's has it, Xavier, I think Seton Hall had it. But and it's a good way to kind of get your kid exposed to one of those schools in a deeper, meaningful way. I think it also helps some of those kids that went to it when it came to some of the scholarships and the scholarship dollars, because the people already knew them a little bit, and they were also tested a little bit academically within those confines. Plus, it's a really inexpensive summer camp kind of a resource. Again, that's a few of the boys' schools that have that. I don't know if some of the girls' schools have an equivalent thing, but certainly worth looking at. You do have to commit to, I think it was 4 weeks of this, and my son was like, "This is my last summer off. I'm not going to do it."
Basically.
But he learned from that because he saw that his friends
we
got
already had
some great
vacations,
scholarships
but,
out of it.
So we kind of lost out on that little piece of the pie.
What does HAP stand for? Do you know? What is it called?
can look it up.
HAP?
HAP.
It's the name of the program that they offer.
So the scholarship and financial aid, that's like a bit confusing to me.
We're going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah, we're definitely going to
That's a separate session.
Ah.
Did you say, Brian, Orange, when do most open houses take place usually?
What did you say? November?
HAP is Higher Achievement Program.
somewhere in the fall, and I think some of them have another one in the spring. Every website has them. You just have to go and kind of somewhere between September and November. They're all
Yeah.
But some of them aren't
announced.
announced yet. So I've
Yeah.
called some of them and they're like, check in
the
June,
website for
we
it.
might know. Some of them don't have them scheduled yet, but they're usually in the fall, from what I can tell.
And honestly, the parents of say 6th or 7th graders, if you create a Google share sheet as you get information, it'd probably be in your best interest to just throw it on there. It's like, and we can get into that when we're talking about the applications too, in terms of to track, even when we were doing 3 compared to 12.
Yeah, I don't know how you did it.
The amount of tracking that you're going to need in a spreadsheet it's complicated.
Because there's all these different milestones and deadlines for different
Each
things.
school is different.
And each school
Yeah.
is different, and each school has a different process. And
That's why it's good preparation for college.
yeah. Well, actually, even college, most of the universities use a standard application now.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
at least that part is
They've
the same, right?
streamlined it, but
But so that was the open houses. I recommend you go to as many as you feel you can manage. I almost think that finding a high school is a matter of elimination, not selection. And you just have to start with lots and kind of eliminate what's not going to work, and then as you kind of get down, then you'll be within 1 or 2 that you're really going to pick from.
Was
at the
the
end.
open house, the info that you got there, your main source of info about the schools, or were there any other
Yeah.
ways that it was going to
Yeah, it is, but you also try to talk to people who are going to the school.
Yeah.
I would also say that, we also got info, and I guess this was more so post acceptance, but Jackson got invited for Student for a Day. Then we also got info where we got invited to special brunches to learn about his whole curriculum
That
and
was
his
sort of after.
program. It was post acceptance, but we didn't neccerily
The
at that
student of the
point
day,
say we
though,
were
The
going.
student of the day, some of the schools will allow you to do that right I think after you get accepted. No, some of them before.
No,
some of
it's
them after.
before you get
So,
accepted.
Every school is different. Some of them are before,
Yeah.
and some of them are after.
And that's when Jackson really knew, I think, when he went to the Seton Hall one, that he came back all smiles, loved the place, and just was so thrilled. And, it was like a really good experience for him to go through that Student for a
Yeah,
Day.
you're going to do some online research. You're going to talk to other parents, and then you're going to get that feel when you go there. I mean, I think so much of it is feel. I mean, it's kind of as long as all the other criteria are there, it's a lot like buying a house. honestly. It's like, you know, as long as it's got 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and an elevator, when you walk into them, it's all about feel. It's not about, you know, this one's 10 square foot bigger than that one.
And did Hudson School give you guys any grief about students skipping day after day to
Oh, yeah.
go to
Oh, yeah,
those
Yeah.
student of the day things?
Yeah, I think they prefer that you schedule it such that maximum of 2 days a week absence, and anything more than that is kind of frowned upon, like how do you know, making up homework or whatever it is.
They didn't make it easy for these 7th and 8th graders going through the process. I'll just put it that
How
way.
many days off were you actually gone? I mean, you make it 2 days a week. I mean, how many days are you doing this? That a kid's gone
Well,
for like
it depends
months?
on, I mean, I
Well,
think you
there's
could
the
weed
dozen
it
schools,
out.
right? So Anya was gone maybe 10 days.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So Jackson maybe did it for
Jackson did
2. Oh, didn't he do
He
St.
did
Peter's
St.
too?
No.
Oh, he just
He
went
just
to
did
Seton
the
Hall.
one.
So he just did the one, and so there was no issue there. But when I say not easy for the kids, like to your point earlier,
Yeah, that's a lot of time.
when it comes to like, you know, I think it's Mr. Coggins is in charge of the whole process of making sure the recommendations get in and on time. That process.
Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
But
That's what
you
I
make
mean
a
when I
good-
say
you
not
make a
easy
good
for the
point that
kids.
Start in the 7th grade because you can. I think some of the schools allow you to do student for a day in the 7th grade. You know, and that way you can spread those days out a little bit further. Again, every school is different, so it's, you know, kind of a process as you go through. As we move along to testing, you know, one thing I will say is that the bad news is that pretty much every school has their own test that they do. And every, you know, the test, the good news is that they're all relatively the same, just slightly different. You know, I've been doing test prep, I did test prep with the 8th grade in the fall, and right now I'm doing it with some 6th and 7th graders here. And I use this book here, this Barron's Co-op book. I mean, there's 3 different kinds of tests in there, but they all cover the same section. You have reading comprehension, you have quantitative analysis, you have kind of some math, you have some verbal. So no matter how they parse it, it's all within the same 5 sections. As far as test prep goes, my recommendation is to start as early as possible. Just having the kids do as much test prep as they can, take as many practice tests, because the tests are just a test to see how well you can manage this test, not how smart you are in anything. Because you can learn everything that's in that book from that book, you know, and so it's just how much are you willing to put in and do the things. Now, Jackson, we hired a tutor from the outside, from
It was an
an
online.
online company, Varsity Tutors, and he had, you know, calls with him, and they had like a digital whiteboard, and he would do test prep. At the end, it was 6 hours a week in the last 2 months that he was there. He was doing, you know, 6 hours a week and maybe 4 hours a week for the 2 months prior to that. You know, so he put time in for the test.
My perspective is totally different because 12 schools and Anya applied to McNair, which is a PSAT, which is probably the toughest test. It's almost like the SAT. And then for the private schools in Manhattan, she had to take the ISE, which is also a tough test, but not as tough as the PSAT. And then I would say COOP was probably the easiest test. So the way I staggered it was, I said, you take the toughest test first, study like crazy for the toughest test, and then do a semi-victory lap over the ISE, and then, you know, just take it easy for the COOP. And it worked beautifully in terms of timing also, because the PSAT comes first. There's only one date for the PSAT. McNair is very inflexible about the date. Same with the COOP. Well, actually, COOP, there's some flexibility, right? You can have 2 or 3 choices. And so I think it works very well if you decide to take the toughest test first. For those of you who are not applying to McNair, that would be the ISE. So I would suggest you study for the ISE first, get that out of the way, and then the COOP is going to be a lot easier in terms of complexity.
The other thing that we learned as we were doing this process is that, for instance, the HSPT. Now it's given for a few of the different Catholic schools that are out there, but they have different versions of the HSPT. So you're better off taking it you're having your kid take it a couple of times at the school that they are applying to, because one, to transfer the scores was a pain. It was multiple phone calls and back and forth from multiple schools. And second, the test is different. So if you take it at a school where they give the harder version of the test, you're not likely to get the same kind of results as you are where they're giving a little less of a version of that.
So that's Catholic school test?
What is it?
It's Catholic schools. I know that it's certainly, I believe it's Regis, Xavier, and St. Peter's all take it.
Oh, so boys Catholic.
The boys.
Yeah.
I'm
St.
not-
So
Dominic's-
the same thing with girls and
Yeah.
boys.
I'm not
St.
sure if
Dominic's,
they take it or
they
not.
do the HS.
But like for instance, Seton Hall gives their own test, so you have to take their test.
And yeah. And that Jackson happened to do phenomenally well on that test.
That's look great.
But the Regis test, really hard, and it's always known to be one of the toughest HSPT tests. We made the mistake of sharing those results with St. Peter's, and he didn't do as well on the Regis test. So while he probably could have sat for the St. Peter's, and a lot of his friends did individually, a lot of his friends ended up with really great scholarships. And Jackson's he got a scholarship, but it was not nearly as good as some of his friends. So we should have done the test individually in all of the schools.
Because you have an option of doing that if you
Yeah.
want to.
Only the Jesuit school, so for instance, Regis is a Jesuit school. It shares with St. Peter's Prep, but they would not have shared with Seton Hall Prep.
And it's not like the SAT where if you take it multiple times and it hurts you or this, you take it at the school where you're
Well, sorry, Bonnie,
Where's
but
the-
if you want to apply to both Xavier and St. Peter's, can you take HSPT and both schools separately? So
Yes.
that you don't allow
Yes,
course for
that's
Xavier?
what we didn't do right,
Okay.
and we would recommend taking the tests individually. As much as it's you
As
don't
much
want
as
your kid to
kids
have
are
to
gonna
take 3 or
hate
4
that,
tests.
but,
It's better off in the end,
uh,
I think.
I thought co-op was Catholic school test, no?
well, there's a number of them. There's co-op, HSBT, and this other one. So all the schools, some schools take one and some the other. So you just have to kind of, and that's really where it comes to the next section, which was applications, right? Tracking. Exactly. I hate to see your spreadsheet because I know what my lousy little 3-school spreadsheet looked like.
Exactly. Oh my God. So yeah, the deadlines are different from each school, and some schools will say everything should be in by this date, and some schools will say I need this by this date, this by this date, and this by this date. And so you really need to have a very, very complicated spreadsheet which pinpoints what each school wants. So for example, you might think that recommendations, let's just collect all the recommendation forms and give it to XYZ teacher the earliest, right? Now, some schools will say, I really want these recommendations. I want you to give it to the teacher after November, because then the teacher knows how the kid has done till November, right? And some schools will say, I don't care, just give it as early as possible. Some schools will say, I need it by January. I don't want it in November, I want it in January. And then you have online recommendations, you have paper recommendations. So it can go
You have
crazy.
online essays, you have
Yeah.
you have paper essays, and the essays can be different. Some of them are the same, and some of them are different. So it really becomes an exercise in how organized you can be, because just kind of sifting through the website to get some of the dates is a hard thing. I mean, the dates are not all this. They don't just leave it out there and say, here's the the 3 key dates that you need. Some of them you have to register for the site, and then they give you some of the date. Then you get some of the dates. So it really takes a lot of work to manage each of the applications to make sure that did we get it in on time? Did we take the right test? Did we, you know, and when the test is given and not given, especially if you're doing multiple schools, because it's all kind of time crunching. I'm surprised you had time to do that many.
I know. It's
Yeah,
impressive.
so if I could redo what I did last year, one, I would not use a shotgun approach. I would use a more rifled approach for selecting the schools. And we just went to too many open houses. And some open houses, some schools' open houses are great, they're very informative. And others, like Horace Mann, it's like, hey, we are Horace Mann, right? Take it or leave it, that kind of an attitude. So you might as well look at the website, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's impressive. They got like acres and acres of this and that, whatever it is. But you might as well look at the website instead of going all the way over there, listening to them, beating their chest, and then come back. So I think we went to too many open houses. And then after the open house, they have a parent interview visit, they have a student interview visit. So you can end up going to the same school 3 times. So we went to Horace Mann like 3 times. And that's not a joke, right? Go from here to Horace Mann. So if you had to redo the process, so my strategy overall was like, I'm going to look at the rankings. I want Anya to go to a great school. Then I want to have another backup, and then I want to have another backup. That was my strategy overall. But I just took a shotgun approach and I said, oh, let's apply to all these schools. You know, you write one essay, you can take this essay and copy and paste here. And that's not a good strategy. That really is not a good strategy. I think it's better you decide, okay, do I want to go to a liberal arts school? Do I want to go to is my kid going to be pre-med in college? So maybe this school is better, maybe this school is better, and target that kind of schools. And also look into the schools in terms of a lot of these schools, 80% of the class is going to be their middle school. I'm talking private schools, of course, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna be like, what? I'm sorry.
It's going to be their own,
Oh, right.
right? So, for example, Avenues, I have the numbers. There are new private schools, but still, I think they have only like 22 or 23 spots in their high school.
Oh, for new
new freshmen. So it's pretty competitive, and everybody's applying for those spots.
Which school is that?
Avenues.
Well, not only that, the other thing that you would want to consider in that particular scenario is now you are the new kid, right? If they're moving up, lots of kids that have been going to school together for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and now you're the new kid in the high school, right? Now they all know each other versus some, these other schools where, they're just high schools, so everybody's the new kid.
Some of these schools are also middle schools as well.
Yes, yes. Yeah, they have middle school.
It's
Just
like-
like
it's
Hudson
like private
School has
schools,
a
yeah.
middle, an upper school where it's a little different because not everybody moves up that way. The one thing I would say about Hudson School, our approach to Hudson School was to not apply and figure if Jackson didn't get in anywhere, that we could figure out a way to make him take him. Rather than do the application and the whole thing, to just kind of say, look, you already know, you're a good kid, I know you have a spot, take it, kind of a thing. So that was more of our approach, is like almost a fail-safe.
Do most parents do that, or?
I don't know what other parents do.
On the flip side, though, it's a very simple process. It was a 1-page application.
Yeah.
After all the stuff I went to the private schools, it was like,
I know.
what, really?
Just do
can't
it.
tell.
Right, get it in.
I also on the applications and stuff, one thing that I remember with the essays was Jackson was really glad that he did the Regis one first, because Regis had maybe how many, like 6 different essays he needed to do, whereas some of the other schools just really needed 2 or 3. And what he was required to do for Regis, he was able to then apply to all of the other schools, and he just maybe modified it to whatever their criteria was on, word count and all that kind of stuff. But he had it all done with Regis, and then he was able to.
But only with
Go
Regis,
over.
you have to be like part of the church.
You have to be baptized
Yeah.
Catholic to apply that.
What about Xavier? Do you know?
I don't think they have a restriction.
No, Xavier doesn't.
It's just part of the Regis charter that they have.
Do you need to submit proof of that?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
send that. We can get baptized.
But
When they ask for letters of recommendation, do they ask for specific people? I mean, do you
Well,
have?
again, depends on the school.
Yeah.
Some,
It depends
some
on the
schools will
school.
say one core teacher, which means it has to be math, right?
Mhm.
It has to be English or history.
Right.
And but some schools they'll just say any 2 letters, and some schools will say 2 letters plus 1 from an outside teacher, like a soccer
Right.
instructor
Okay.
or whatever.
And it could be teachers from prior years, or do they all have to be 8th grade teachers?
No, I think
I think it could be prior year.
Jackson did prior year, so like I think I'm well.
I think
I think
Mr.
Mr. I think Mr. It was either Mr. Pulaski or Mr. Coggins that wrote a recommendation, and then he went to his math teacher and his history teacher
And that's and you probably know
in 8th
better
grade.
than I do, but tracking down the recommendations and making sure they sent them in was not an easy process in and of itself, because it's not online, so you don't know, did they send this thing in or did they not send it in? And usually a lot of the high school application processes are online, but that teacher recommendation piece is usually kind of like the last thing, and it doesn't show up, they don't online to say, is my application complete? And so you don't know if it was sent, or you don't know if they received it, so then you're like in this limbo trying to chase it down
Yeah.
a lot. So that was one thing where, you know, if you guys kind of got together and said that would be a parent issue to say, hey, you know, can we get these applications online so we can track? But again, school has no incentive or will to want to help the parents through this process. So that's a challenge in of
How do
itself.
they send them to the schools then? You said
I have no idea. I think they mail some of them, and
I
they
think they do mail
and they
some
upload
of them,
some
and
of them.
yeah, and I know Jackson's. I want to say I think it was his math one that was late.
They were just they
And there's already so much pressure on these
The kids
kids
are
during the
freaking out.
process, and they're doing the best that they can to keep up with everything, and they're stewarding these recommendations. And I mean, I can't even tell you how much panic there was when they realized that it didn't get there.
or you know, the kids are going to have a lot of angst over managing the applications and making sure, and they're the ones, because they're the ones who are asking the teachers about their recommendations. It's not us, it's, you know, they're the ones that have to interface with them.
So you were not the ones emailing the teacher to just send it in?
Well, eventually.
Well,
Yeah.
we wanted him to own a lot of it too, to go through this, but we were in the background kind of doing things as well.
But you had, they also have
Checking in with the
30
teacher.
kids,
Why
and,
isn't it sent?
you know, and you got somebody who, you know, you weren't the only one probably that applied to 12 schools, right? Person. So let's say the average is 6. So that's 30 kids times 6 applications, 180 times 2 teachers. That's 360 recommendations that have to be managed out there. They're not doing a very, you know, I mean, they're doing what they can.
And they
while
don't
they
have-
teach and do
I don't think
everything
they
else.
have
they
the
don't have
resources.
somebody right.
'Cause
They don't have a
anybody
resource
to manage
manager,
it.
and why would they? Because they'd rather you just.
So,
stay
Right.
there.
you know, you really have to take ownership of that part of it up front. Just know that there's going to be some challenges there.
Can you use the same recommendation from one teacher for several schools though?
no, again, it depends on the school because each school has a different form.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the whole problem. That's the whole
Yeah,
problem.
that's
Because
why-
a lot of them don't want you to see it, so it has to come from the
Directly
teacher.
from the
Yeah.
teacher to
Or the school,
and it's
yeah.
not the same format.
And,
so.
Right.
and so, you know, the teachers ask that you get your recommendation request in as soon as possible, so they can start preparing them. You know, in even October, you know, even though they might not be due for 6 or 8 weeks after that because they have so many to write. Just know that
Do they don't know the kids in October, in 8th grade, that's, so they
so
look
some,
at their.
well, I mean, that's why
files,
we
they don't
chose
know.
some people in the 7th grade so we could
Right.
get that.
Yeah, I could do that.
Substance, right.
The places we
Yeah.
applied, we had to use 8th
Yeah.
grade teachers. We couldn't. We
You're
couldn't use 7th grade
you're kind of
teachers.
stuck at the whim
Yeah.
of
The school request.
the school request, and then, you know, obviously with your kid, which ones they feel comfortable with too. I'm not going to use names of the teachers, but I will say that there is definitely some friction between some of the kids and some of the teachers. And, you know, choose those teachers at your peril, you know, because you never know what they're going to write because you don't see it.
So you
Not that they're not going to write nice things, but
You never get to see it.
you don't get to see it. So, you know, use ones that you know they're going to write something nice. That
Well, the kids know usually.
the kids
Yeah,
know.
they have intuition, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of choose to figure out how to play the bad guy because you know you can follow the recommendations personally with your student and with Mr. Coggins. So you've got to figure out how many times to ask Mr. Coggins, how many times the kid needs to ask, because I think you should use the kid the least. They're already having a lot of tension over this process. You try to protect them as much as possible. And you try to be the bad guy as much as possible, and then if that doesn't work, try